Going into the Tata Steel India Rapid and Blitz tournament, Hikaru Nakamura was the #1 Blitz player in the world. So to do to him what D Gukesh did in this game is really quite exceptional. He's a 16-year-old prodigy, Gukesh this is. He's from India, and this just is an annihilation of Hikaru's Kingside, so stick with it to the end. So we had d4 on the board. Hikaru goes for knight f6, c4, e6 played, and now knight f3 was played, avoiding knight c3, bishop b4. Now we had d5, and knight c3 comes at this point. So the bishop develops to e7, and now there are different moves here for white. You can go bishop f4, g5, etc. We see takes on d5 instead. The pawn recaptures. This is known as the Carlsbad pawn structure. And now this bishop comes to f4 and castles from black. So already we're in a kind of rarer hybrid of the Queen's Gambit structures. Not so many games from here. e3 was now played, and here Hikaru really goes his own way. We get into a new position very, very soon. So the main way to play for black here, the main kind of pawn structure to set up anyway, is pawn c6. You bolster your centre, you take away b5 from any of the minor pieces, and you kind of preempt an attack on that c-pawn down the half-open c-file. But Hikaru goes pawn b6, a much more ambitious way to play. So now bishop d3 was played, and he strikes with c5. So castles now from white, bishop to b7, rook c1, and now a6 played to take that b5 square. So you can see that Hikaru's position just looks a little bit loose. He's not yet finished his development, and he soon comes under fire on the king side. So knight e5 played, and this is where you've got the makings of that attack. The queen is open, the knight is dominant, so it gets challenged with this knight from d7. Queen f3 now came on the board, and Hikaru goes rook to e8. He's a little bit passive, stuck to his back three ranks with all of his pieces. So rook f to d1 played, completing development, and now Hikaru just comes up with the wrong plan here basically. So what he should do, according to the engines here, is take on d4. And it's a logical idea because after pawn recaptures, well, at least you can challenge this file, try and generate some play, and then the computer likes this maneuver of knight to f8, knight e2 is one good move from white, and then this knight can come to e6. A nice defensive square also puts pressure on this bishop, could come to g5 if this bishop moves away, look at e4, all this kind of stuff going on, rook c8 can come. So white's still better, but these were some better plans for black. But Hikaru goes rook to a7, very weird looking move. But his whole idea is to sit the queen on a8 so that he can then support the knight coming to e4. Because at the minute, you can't land the knight on e4, you'll just lose a pawn after it all gets chopped off. So g4 now came from Gukesh. Really an excellent move. I mean, it's not the computer's top move, as you can see here, but it generates this attack. Perfect for blitz chess as well. And now c4 by Hikaru, and the computer hates it. For the reason being, you're taking that tension off of the center. White can now turn to the king side with a free hand. So the bishop came into f5. The knight jumped back to f8. And now bishop b1 was played, not forced. You could start with g5 or even h4, but okay, the bishop slides back. Still an advantage for white here. Queen a8, Hikaru carries on with his plan. Now pawn to g5, the knight hits e4, and we get this trade on the square, pawn recaptures, and the queen slides away. So the queen and knight are now threatening to take on f7, so g6 kicks the queen, it came back to h4 here, and now it's hard for Hikaru to generate counterplay ever since he closed down the centre here. So he goes b5, trying to get those pawns going, but now knight g4 from Gukesh is an excellent move, eyeing these dark squares here, and Hikaru's already got big problems. So there's a threat now to go knight h6 check, then take this pawn, and if the king were to move to either one of these dark squares, well then bishop e5 check is coming as a deadly follow-up. So say you go knight to d7, this is something I was looking at, to cover the e5 square from the bishop. Well, the problem now is check, king g7, and can you see the killer move for white here to pretty much finish the game on the spot? So the way to crash through is with knight takes on f7, because after the king captures, you've decoyed it away from the defense of this pawn, can't step to f6, so after it goes, you're just hunting it down. Now you can intercept with a piece, but then that gets taken, although that is the best way to play. If the king keeps running, well, then you can kill the king. This is the picture I showed in the thumbnail, actually. These two deadly snipers just absolutely killing the king down the diagonal. It's cut here, the pawn cuts here, cuts there. So what about that for a checkmate? Anyway, these are the problems with Hikaru's defense. Knight d7, no good. So he plays pawn h5. It's the best move. Now, you can't capture en passant or you lose your queen, but what you can do is check. Gukesh plays this. And now again, if you step to g7 or h8, this bishop e5 check is a killer in combination with pawn and the queen also supporting that square. So this one is forced, and that's why Hikaru went pawn to h5 to give the king that square. Even though you lose this pawn, it was the best defensive move. So that one just captured there. The bishop came to d5, hits the knight. It jumped back into e5 here, and now Hikaru just goes off the rails basically with his plans. So he should come to e6 with this knight. It's the best defensive square, and it also attacks this threatening bishop. If white goes f3, which we see in the game, well then rook f8 is the best follow-up for black. Again, all about pressuring this piece, trying to generate counterplay essentially. But we didn't have knight e6. Knight d7 was played to challenge the knight on e5, but now f3 comes anyway, and Hikaru's in a lot of trouble. Now the idea of this f3 one is that the pawn is immune. The moment you capture, you open up this bishop, and as well as the fact you can take here, the big problem is that you can actually take here with check using the pin, and of course you're just completely running the king around. That's about to be checkmate. So the pawn on f3 is immune. So Hikaru goes knight b6, really not a good move, heading in the wrong direction. If he takes, by the way, I mean, this is still a very, very difficult position. Look at that bishop. So okay, he comes to b6, and now the bishop dropped back to g3. The idea is to open up the queen. Now you're threatening to capture this pawn. The pieces are converging. So the queen comes here saying, okay, if you take on e4, I'm going to take here. There is this amazing sacrifice right now, by the way, of knight takes on g6, just crashing everything through, opening the diagonal. Won't go down that route, but it's a really beautiful line. Anyway, bishop f4 from Gukesh. He just comes back, holds the g5 pawn. So Hikaru goes back. Does Gukesh want a draw? Well, of course not in this position. He goes rook f1. Great move, just anticipating the fact that one day the tension will be resolved between these pawns. Open up the rook for invasion. So bishop b4 from Hikaru, prophylaxis, opening this rook to defend the 7th rank here, as well as improving the bishop. Now we had rook f2, prepares to double, also covers this square from any bishop invasion. King g7 from Hikaru, so coming off this deadly diagonal, and now this rook doubled, and Hikaru brings his rook over to the f-file here. So the bishop came back to g3, opening the f-file for the rooks. And this time you can't counterattack on the pawn with bishop and queen. There's a ton of pressure here, all these pieces converging, so hard to know what to do. So Hikaru captures on f3. He didn't have a whole ton better, to be honest. But now we see this move of bishop takes on g6. Here Gukesh is breaking through to the king. So rook e7 was played, and now he doesn't even yet capture this pawn and sort of run into this stuff. Instead, he goes for e4, driving back this bishop. It came back here, and now we see bishop f5. You could take there, by the way. You could take here. So many good moves. Now the rook came to block this file, but simple tactic for Gukesh. He jumps with the knight, forks those rooks. Hikaru's scrambling. So he takes on e4 here, trying to break up that central pawn mass. The bishop recaptures. Bishop takes, and he picks up this exchange here, and we don't even see this one recaptured. If you go with the king, we'll check, and this is all very, very bad, with queen and bishop starting to work together, plus the rooks coming potentially. And if you take with the queen, well, then you drop the bishop on e4. Horrible, horrible stuff. So the knight came back to d7 instead, trying to come back to the right side of the board now. And g6 now from Gukesh. So giving this knight an escape square. Still it wasn't taken for the reasons mentioned. Hikaru centralizes with queen to d5. Knight f7 was played. And now this queen took on d4. Desperate for counterplay down this diagonal. So the queen took on h5 now, as soon as this one left the defense. And now bishop c5, but check now from Gukesh. The king's getting the runaround. And there are so many winning moves here, as you can imagine. Gukesh goes for a very, very simple one. He checks with the pawn. The knight's immune, then you make a queen with check, about to lead to checkmate. So the queen has to capture. Gukesh chops these ones off, and then backpedals with the knight, hitting this bishop and soon to pick up this pawn. And he doesn't even rush to do that. First, he takes care of king safety. I mean, they're down to seconds, as you can see. You have to be prophylactic. Now we had b4 from Hikaru. Rook d2. I mean, he is literally an exchange up and a rook here. He could have resigned, but okay, we had a few more moves. Bishop a8 was played, so he literally gives a knight. I mean, I guess this was his best move, to go bishop c6. But I guess he was looking for some kind of counterplay with the pawn coming and check. Anyway, we had simply takes, check, king goes, knight takes on f3, and now a few more moves were played. This was how the game ended. Bishop's attacked, and now we had this one attacking the pawn for a second time. Here we finally had a resignation. So absolute annihilation from Gukesh. If you want to see another fantastic game played by him and Magnus Carlsen, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.